I found a door in my old school. What I discovered changed everything. I never believed in school legends. Every school has its own ghost stories, haunted bathrooms, cursed lockers, classrooms where students supposedly went missing. But in my school, there was one mystery that stood apart from all the silly tales. It wasn't a joke for scaring first graders. It was something we all saw every day, and something none of us dared to talk about too loudly. It was the door. The third floor of our old school building had always felt different. The hallways were darker, the air mustier, and the windows covered in a fine layer of cobwebs. No matter how often the janitors cleaned, few classes were ever held up there. Most teachers preferred the brighter, livelier first and second floors. But everyone knew about the door at the very end of the longest hallway, near the abandoned physics classroom. It was massive, thick oak, reinforced with rusting iron bands at the bottom. But it wasn't just a door anymore. Someone had bricked it up, sealing the frame with crude cement and old red bricks that didn't match the walls. The whole thing looked wrong, like a scar in the architecture. And yet, no matter how much cement was stuffed into the cracks, it was still a door. You could see the faint outlines of the frame. If you pressed your ear against it, sometimes you could hear things. Whispers, shuffling steps, knocking. I remember the first time I asked about it. I was 12, curious, and far too brave for my own good. Our history teacher, Mrs. Horvath, had been working at the school for decades, and I thought surely she'd know the truth. "Miss, what's behind the door on the third floor?" I asked. Her face froze. She adjusted her glasses, then gave me a sharp look that silenced the whole class. "Andre," she said, because that was my name. "You're a clever boy. There are things in the school better left alone." I laughed nervously, but I could see the way her hands trembled as she picked up the chalk. She hadn't been joking. Later, I tried my luck with the principal himself. He was a tall, severe man who hated disruptions. "Sir, why is that old door sealed up?" I asked, pretending it was just innocent curiosity. He slammed his hand on the desk so hard I jumped. "That's a service area," he barked. "Forget about it. If I ever catch you snooping around there again, you'll be expelled. Do you understand me?" His eyes burned with something more than anger, something like fear. That was the moment I knew the door wasn't just a maintenance closet. Of course, kids talked. They always do. Some swore a teacher had dropped dead in that room 40 years ago, right in the middle of class, and ever since then it was cursed. Others said that during the Soviet years, the school had been used for strange experiments, psychological tests, or worse. According to that version, an accident happened, and the room was permanently sealed. The braver kids claimed it was nothing but a storeroom. "The door looks creepy, so they just bricked it up to mess with us," one boy said. But even he never went closer than a few feet. And I noticed something strange. Even the janitors avoided it. They'd sweep the long hallway, their brooms scratching across the dusty linoleum. But they always stopped a good 3 meters short of the door, turning away like it wasn't there. It was as though the whole building had made an unspoken agreement. We would pretend that door didn't exist, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. One winter afternoon in 7th grade, I stayed late after school, waiting for my mother to pick me up. The hallways were empty, the classrooms locked, the building almost asleep. That's when I heard it. A faint sound coming from the third floor. Knock, knock, knock. It was so steady, so deliberate, like someone tapping a spoon against a jar. I froze on the staircase, my backpack hanging loose from one shoulder. The whole building was silent except for that sound. I told myself not to be stupid. Maybe it was the pipes, maybe a janitor, maybe anything. But my legs carried me upward anyway. The third floor was colder than the rest of the school. My breath misted in the air as I walked down the hallway. The closer I got, the louder the knocking became. And then I was standing in front of the bricked-up door. The sound stopped. I reached out, hard hammering, and pressed my palm against the wall. It was freezing. Not just winter cold, ice cold, like touching metal that had been left outside all night. I held my breath, waiting. For a moment there was silence. Then, 3 knocks. From the other side. I bolted. I don't even remember running down the stairs. Just the sound of my sneakers slapping the floor and the echo of my own panicked breathing. By the time I burst out into the courtyard, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my backpack in the snow. After that night, I dreamed of the door constantly. In my dreams, I'd walk down the dark hallway, see the bricks, touch the cold surface, and then the knocks would start, pulling me closer and closer until I woke up in a sweat. That door became a part of me, a question I couldn't stop asking. What was behind it? And why did the adults seem more afraid of it than we were? Years passed. I graduated, left the school behind, and told myself I'd forget about that cursed hallway. But the truth is I never did. Even in college, the door still haunted me. Sometimes I'd be sitting in a lecture, my professor droning on, and out of nowhere I'd hear those knocks in my head. 3 steady taps. My stomach would drop, and I'd feel like I was back in that dusty hallway, frozen in front of the bricked-up frame. I told no one. How could I? Hey, remember that weird sealed door in our old school? I think it was knocking at me. People would laugh. Or worse, they'd believe me. Life went on. I got a job, moved away for a while, even started dating someone seriously. But in the quiet moments lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I always thought about it. About how badly I'd wanted to know the truth, and how afraid I'd been when it seemed the truth was knocking back. And then, years later, fate gave me another chance. It was almost 10 years after I graduated, when I was invited back to the school for a reunion. Honestly, I didn't want to go. Reunions always felt like excuses for people to brag about their lives or gossip about old classmates. But something inside me whispered, go back. See it for yourself. When I walked through those familiar doors, everything felt both smaller and stranger. The classrooms looked shabbier. The paint was peeling worse than I remembered, and the hallways smelled faintly of mold. I shook hands, made small talk, smiled when I was supposed to, but the whole time, my thoughts were on the 3rd floor. Finally, during a lull in the evening, I slipped away. Nobody stopped me. I walked up the same staircase, each creak of the wooden steps like an echo from my childhood. The 3rd floor was almost exactly as I remembered. Dusty, dimly lit, abandoned looking. My heart raced, and then I saw it. The door. Only, it wasn't bricked up anymore. The frame stood wide open, the bricks and cement gone as if they'd never been there. In their place was a heavy wooden door, its surface scratched and scarred with age, but unmistakably intact. And worse, it was ajar. A thin sliver of darkness yawned beyond it. For a long time, I just stood there staring, every hair on my body rising. This was impossible. I'd spent years convincing myself I'd imagined the whispers, the cold, the knocking, but the sealed door had been real. Everyone knew it. So, why was it open now? I should have turned around. I should have gone back downstairs, rejoined the reunion, laughed about old times. Instead, I pushed the door wider and stepped inside. At first glance, it was just a classroom. Desks stacked in the corners, broken chairs, cobwebs stretching across the ceiling. Dust lay thick on the floor, undisturbed for years. But the air was wrong. Cold, heavy, like walking into a cellar. And then I noticed the papers. Scattered across the teacher's desk were old notebooks, yellowed with age. Some were math exercises, others just blank pages scribbled with doodles. I flipped through them, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I found it. A photograph. It showed a class of students, lined up in neat rows, their faces blurred slightly with age. I recognized the classroom. It was this one. But when I looked closer, my blood froze. Because there I was, standing in the back row. Only this photograph had been taken decades ago, long before I was born. I stared at the picture until my vision blurred. The boy in the photo wasn't just similar, he looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same crooked half smile, even the same posture I'd always been teased about. I dropped the photo onto the desk and stumbled back, my hands shaking. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Behind me, the door creaked. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The door remained slightly open, swaying as though someone had just passed through. That's when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 steady taps, coming not from the hallway, but from inside the walls. I bolted out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest, and didn't stop running until I was back in the crowded reunion, panting and pale. People asked if I was okay. I lied, said I just felt dizzy, maybe too much wine. But inside, I knew I had just stepped into something I was never meant to see. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photograph burned in my mind. I should have taken it with me, but my fear had made me drop it. What if someone else found it? What if it disappeared? By morning, I knew I couldn't leave it alone. I had to go back. The next morning, I couldn't wait. I had to know. I didn't care about reunion events, catching up with old friends, or even my own safety. That door had consumed my thoughts for over a decade, and now I was finally going back. I arrived at the school just after sunrise. The building looked different in the early light, less intimidating somehow, but still strange. Shadows clung to the corners of hallways, and the smell of dust and mold was sharper than ever. I walked straight to the staircase leading to the 3rd floor. No one was there. No janitors, no students, not even the distant hum of lights. Just silence. And the door. It was exactly as I had left it, slightly ajar. The wooden surface scratched and scarred, like an old wound in the building. I took a deep breath and pushed it open fully this time. The room wasn't just a classroom. It was different. The walls were lined with shelves, stacked with boxes, old papers, and photographs. Dust motes floated in the pale sunlight that filtered through the high windows. The air was heavy, electric, charged with something I couldn't name. I stepped carefully, trying not to disturb the decades of neglect. My eyes darted to the teacher's desk in the center of the room. More notebooks, more papers, more photographs. And then I saw a small, leather-bound book on the floor, as if it had been placed there intentionally. I opened it and immediately recognized the handwriting. It wasn't a teacher's or a student's, this was my mother's handwriting. The pages told a story I never expected. It described experiments that had been done in the school. Not the kind of boring science experiments we were taught. The old principle decades ago had been conducting tests on children's memory and perception, using a combination of psychological techniques and something more, something that could manipulate memory itself. The diary mentioned me by name, even before I was born. According to the notes, my mother's father, the same man I had grown up calling grandfather, had been involved in the experiments, and one of the children selected for the test was me. I dropped the book. My hands trembled, my mind spinning. I went back to the photograph I had seen the day before. The boy who looked exactly like me was not me. Not really. He was a child from the experiment decades earlier, genetically or psychically linked to me, a template for something I could not yet comprehend. The room itself seemed to respond to my realization. The walls creaked, and the temperature dropped. Then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it came from the far corner of the room, where an old wooden cabinet leaned against the wall. I approached it slowly. The knocking stopped as soon as I got near, replaced by a faint whispering. I couldn't make out the words at first, but gradually they became clear. You were always meant to find this. I pushed the cabinet aside and discovered a small door behind it. Unlike the main door, this one had no handle, no lock, just a small slot that seemed made for a key, but no key was present. I pressed my hand against it, and it opened. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. My heart pounded. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't. I had to know. I descended slowly. The steps were uneven, covered in dust. At the bottom was a small chamber, walls lined with shelves of old notebooks, photographs, and strange mechanical devices. A faint hum filled the air, like electricity or some hidden energy source. And in the center of the chamber, sitting in a chair, eyes closed, hands folded, was a figure. The figure opened its eyes. I froze. It was me. Not an older version, not a twin. Me. Exact features, exact eyes. Welcome, it said. Its voice was my own, only deeper. You finally made it. I stumbled back. What? What are you? I am the result of what they did here. The experiment that started decades ago, using your genetic and psychic template. You were always meant to find me, to understand, to complete it. Everything clicked. The photographs, the diary, the door, the knocking, the whispers. My life, my childhood memories, they had all been influenced, manipulated. The door hadn't been sealed to hide a simple room. It had been sealed to hide the truth about me. I realized then that the school wasn't just a building. It was a testing ground. And I was both the observer and the observed, both the child and the outcome. The figure stood. I stared at it, paralyzed. You can leave, it said. Forget everything. Go back to your life. Or you can stay and learn what you were always meant to know. I looked around the chamber. The walls, the books, the photos, they all called to me. The mystery I had chased for so long, the fear, the obsession, it had all led here. I realized that leaving would mean forgetting everything, that the truth would remain locked in the shadows. But staying meant facing who I really was. I took a step forward, and then another. The figure smiled. Good. It's time you remembered everything. I don't remember exactly how long. I stayed in that chamber, reading, learning, confronting pieces of myself I had never known. But when I finally left, the door behind me was gone. The hallway looked normal. The bricked-up door, now open, now inviting, was just a memory. I returned to my life. But nothing was the same. Every memory, every choice, every instinct, I knew now it had been guided, influenced by forces I would never fully understand. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the knocks. 3 steady taps, always reminding me I am both the seeker and the secret. And the school, it waits, silent, watching, patient, because some doors, once open, never truly close.